Yeah, this definitely is not a classroom. It got quiet. You all want to get started. Okay, welcome. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Brian King. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography. I'm also the department head. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker for today's talk. Before I do so, however, this talk is part of Geography's Coffee Hour, essentially our colloquium series. And we do take a minute at the top to highlight some of the good news from our members of our community. So I have two items. Ruth Buck, who's a graduate student in our department, along with two of our faculty, Emily Rosenman and Louisa Holmes, have a new publication in the journal Finance and Space titled Financial Structures and Family Ties, Disentangling Purdue Pharma's Corporate Ownership Structure and the Sackler Family Wealth. This includes a complex interactive visualization of Purdue's corporate structure that Ruth, as the first author, coded manually. And she shared some of that with us. It's quite impressive. So congratulations. Our second and final item, I've deliberately paused to make sure we had a very large attendance for this. And so I'm going to ask Alicia Iverson just very quickly to stand. You can then sit down if you want. Alicia is a teaching faculty in our department and is also the director of the Geographics Lab, which is our forward-facing community-partnered cartography lab, which has really taken off the last couple of years, and Alicia deserves a lot of credit for that. What the good news I'm announcing is that in August, Alicia successfully defended her dissertation at the University of Wisconsin. It's titled Processorial Cartography for Creative, Collective, and Community Engagement. It's been accepted by the graduate school, and so now I'm going to ask Dr. Alicia Iverson to please stand for a round of applause. I also, before I go into the introduction, I do want to particularly thank Katie O'Hare-Krebs, who is with the libraries, has been supporting this event. Katie is the communication and business liaison librarian, and we could not have this space without it. So Katie, thank you very much. All right, let's get started. I've been looking forward to this. I know that probably more than one of you in this audience is not a geography faculty member or graduate student. So as the department head, I have to take this opportunity, first of all, to welcome you. And we recognize that when you hear geography, certain things come to mind. But I do want to just make it clear that you are at an institution that has one of the best graduate programs and undergraduate programs in geography across both online and residential. If anyone in this room is interested in human dimensions of environmental change, climate change adaptation, social and environmental justice, spatial data analysis, sustainability, human health and well-being, the list goes on and on and on. We are your departmental home. And so please reach out to us, reach out to me, and we'll be happy to talk with you about geography. We also have fun and we love sports. But as Kirk's talk is going to demonstrate, geographers, we're not simply content to just sit on the sidelines. We want to innovate. We want to transform the sports. And so Kirk is obviously representative of this, and we're delighted to have such a large audience for this talk. Dr. Kirk Goldsberry is an MBA analyst and the New York Times bestselling author of Sprawlball, which examines how analytics changed the NBA forever. He previously served as the vice president of strategic research for the San Antonio Spurs and as the lead analyst of Team USA basketball. His award-winning writing focuses on the intersections between data and sports, and he's widely recognized as one of the pioneers in NBA data analytics. He earned his bachelor's at Penn State with a concentration in geography, his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2007, and he's previously worked as a professor at Michigan State University and Harvard. He currently serves as MBA analyst at The Ringer and as the executive director of the Business of Sports Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. His most recent book is titled Hoop Atlas. It came out just this year. And as of Monday, I can report this week, it was sold out on Amazon. So I've had to get multiple copies from his publisher and friends and networks. And so if you're going to order it, make sure you give a little bit of time for it to arrive. The title of his talk is Mapping the Modern NBA: How Cartography Helped Change Basketball Forever. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kirk Goldsberry.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. All right, thanks. It's always nice to be back here at Penn State. And I don't know what screen I'm supposed to use. Let's see if this works. I'm going to start with this video.
Who's getting buckets brought to you by KFC.
But an NBA shot
That's a
chart looks
bucket
like it's
clutch bucket.
2025.
This started way back in October. Throughout the course of the regular season
here.
and here in the playoffs, Tyrese Halliburton
If you don't
Down
know
in
who
the
that voice
Spurs
is,
front.
I don't want
Look
to be
at
your
the
friend.
field goal
So that's my
percentage
brain.
in the final 2 minutes, either
And we will
tie
be
or
start
take the
for
lead.
finals.
You know, all talked about was that anonymous poll in the Athletic. He was voted the most overrated. I think.
All right. So how do I get back to, can you guys see the whole screen? Chris, I'm going to need you to come back up here. I don't remember how to get this up. But yeah, today it's, before I begin, like I want to say thank you to Penn State Geography, Penn State community. Thank you guys for coming out here. It's always nice to come back to Penn State. I grew up in State College. I'll talk about that in a second. But this place means the world to me. But yeah, today I want to talk about how my career changed through geography and basketball analytics, and how I think that might be instructive for some of the young people in the room to think about their own futures. My story started, anybody been to Green Hollow Park in Park Forest here in State College? Well, this story starts on the basketball court there, where I would practice basketball religiously for hours a day. Cindy Brewer lives in Park Forest. You still shoot hoops, Cindy? Cindy, you shoot hoops at Park Forest? But I would work on my post game, because back in the 1990s, that was how basketball was played. For the young people in the room, post play is when you pass it to the bigger player and they fight with another bigger player. That's gone. But I noticed some things about my own game while I was practicing as an elementary school age basketball player that stuck with me. And that's a thread I want to weave through. So when I was growing up, it was this dude. We all wanted to be like Mike. And this is an example of a post player, and probably the best post player guard that we've ever seen in the sport. As you can see here, he fakes over one shoulder and shoots over the other, one of his classic moves. And I noticed when I was shooting at Green Hollow, trying to emulate this guy, I could only do that from one side of the court okay, and then the other side I sucked at. And that always stuck with me. So I'd always post up on the left block, and I would suck on the right block. And that stuck with me, and that really drove the conversation we're going to have today. But that started here in State College well before I was at Penn State. So my talk today is called Mapping the Modern NBA, How Cartography Helped Change Basketball Forever. Again, my name is Kirk Goldsberry. I graduated from here in 1999. I still don't have tickets for tomorrow's game. So if anybody has extras, let me know. But I'm going to go through, for the geographers, I have a short 10-minute geography thing. For the non-geographers, I apologize for this. We'll get through it together, and then there'll be a bunch of NBA shot charts, I promise. So let's go. So the NBA started in 1946, about 80 years ago. This is footage from the first game, which was where? Does anybody know where the first NBA game was? Give you a hint, it was not in the United States of America. Canada, in Toronto. This is relevant. So in 1948, I just want to do like this really brief history of how I got here. This dude, Professor Conant, invented mustard gas. Ever heard of it? Chemical weapons. Oversaw the creation of the atomic bomb. And then, as a reward, was named president of Harvard after World War II. And in 1948, what did he do, Brian? Yeah. He declared geography is not a university subject. And after his triumphs in chemical weapons and atomic warfare, he killed geography. So in 400 years, Harvard has eliminated one academic department, and that is geography, in 1948. Why does that matter here today? In 1952, probably the best academic geographer we've had in the United States writes a book / dissertation called The Look of Maps. Again, probably the best talented young person teaching geography, and he lands at, where does he land? Safety School, University of Wisconsin. Sorry, Dr. Iverson. There's only one Iverson in my life, and I'm sorry, it's not you. But this is my sort of academic lineage. So Arthur sort of forms academic cartography. Is that fair to say, Cindy? One of his PhD students was a great young scholar named Judy Olson, who went on to be a legendary professor at Michigan State, where Cindy Brewer, who's in this room, studied and got her PhD. And she was my favorite teacher here at Penn State. And then ironically or poetically, whatever, in 2007, when Judy retired, I took that job at Michigan State. I didn't like East Lansing as much as Judy Olson, though. So as we go through the 40s and 50s, geography, Harvard, it doesn't have it. Numbers start to become important. In the 70s and 80s, you know, Larry and Magic take the MBA to new heights, and GIS, Geographic Information System, starts to emerge, personal computing. Everybody starts talking about computing, right? And so this is happening concurrently as the MBA is sort of exploding. By the time I show up at Penn State, cartography is largely a data-driven endeavor. Not entirely, and I think while I was here at Penn State, and Cindy can back me up, we got rid of the drafting tables and replaced them with computers, and sort of a poetic shift away from how maps were made for hundreds of years to how they're made now. And that's not irrelevant to my story. So I'm here, 1996. I get here. That's an interesting year on our timeline. So we made it through the really boring geography part. Congratulations. In 1996, I start here at Penn State, but more relevant to the story, the first spatial data set ever created for the MBA is launched. The official scorers who sit at the scorers table at MBA games started recording the shot location of every shot in the NBA. So 1996, for the first time, if Shaq dunked it, these are coordinates for the basketball hoop. That would be recorded as a made field goal by Shaquille O'Neal with these XY coordinates. Why does that matter? Wherever there's XY coordinates, you need geographers, you need spatial reasoning, you need spatial analysis. Okay? That's why that matters. Fast forward 7 years, and this is what I call in my classes the Old Testament of sports analytics at this point. So 2003, you can't tell a story about sports analytics without talking about Moneyball, one of the best books of the 21st century, period. One of the best business books of the 21st century. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. I make all my students read it. In 2003, I'd moved on from Penn State. I was in UC Santa Barbara, another great geography program, getting grad degrees. Michael Jordan plays his last game for the Washington Wizards, and LeBron James enters the NBA. So it's a pretty big moment in NBA timeline, but also the sports analytics timeline. I'm sort of perfectly coming of age at this moment with sort of contemporary geography skills. And so I want to spend a few times, this helps me sort of contextualize what happened with me is going from Moneyball, which is a much more successful book than Sprawlball, to Sprawlball in 2019. So let's talk about that. So in 2003, these are the 200 most common shot locations in that NBA where LeBron is exiting or LeBron is arriving and Michael Jordan is exiting. As you can see, there's still a lot of shots off the left block, off the elbow, around the free throw line, and a healthy mix of threes. Pretty diverse use of the scoring area. Setting up something, you know it. Judy Olson retires. And then in 2011, I taught the first geography classes at Harvard since 1948. So they hired me away from Michigan State to teach undergraduate geography. And so I designed some mapping classes in 2011. For the geographers in the room, it was a very special opportunity for me to get to teach geography at Harvard College, and a very special opportunity for our field. But the real story with my trajectory starts in 2012. I was teaching geography at Harvard, but like I got from Michigan State to Harvard, and the professors in the room will appreciate this. I went from like a 3-3 course load to a 1-1. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, oh, I have time to do stuff. And I started messing with basketball data. I started messing with basketball data in 2011. And in 2012, I published a paper that changed my career around. So for those sports nerds in the room, I know we have our Penn State sports analytics group represented here today. My career really changed the day I put this paper out at MIT at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference in 2012, March 2012. And the thesis of this paper, there's an emerging need for spatially informed evaluations that can be effectively communicated to a diverse set of audiences. Essentially arguing that Moneyball's cool, but it would be cooler if we had some graphs, charts, maps, and if we had some spatial considerations in sports analytics. And in that paper, like I demonstrated my thesis by mapping Dirk Nowitzki and Kobe Bryant and Steve Nash at the time. These were the greatest shooters in the NBA. And showing that we could take that XY data set from 1996 and bring it to life in new ways. So taking a data set that was started in 1996 and bringing it to life. And again, it's 2012. That's 16 years later. We started collecting this data in 1996, and this paper came out in 2012. And so for the geographers in the room, there's a bunch of incredible data sets out there getting dusty and waiting for our treatment to tease out things. That's one of the big lessons of this episode. When you plot out a season's worth of NBA shots, there's about 200,000 shots every NBA season. So about 500 dudes combined to take about 200,000 shots. And this is what it looks like. It's a shitload of dots. Great. But thanks to analytical cartography, it's now called GIS, or however you guys are ruining the names of these things, we can make a lot of intelligence out of this data. There's a lot of intelligence that geographers and geospatial analysts can tease out of these data sets. So one of the first staggering revelations I made that I had when I was mapping this data back in 2011 and 12 was I just mapped field goal percentage, which was the dominant metric in shooting efficiency in the early 2010s. That's just essentially an expression of what are the chances a shot would go in if an NBA player took it from a general place on the floor. And the staggering revelation I had was, oh, I thought 50% was like the general field goal percentage of the NBA. But that players really only hit 50% of their shots within 5 feet of the hoop. Outside of that, it's a 30 to 40% endeavor. And that's a huge point. So corner threes go in 36, 37%. These shots only go in 40, 42%. You get the idea. Really, the only place where people are making half their shots is near the basketball hoop. Okay? And this, you guys, the basketball nerds know where this is all going. But this was the first time this kind of map was made. Facts. 2012. This is the actual economic landscape of the NBA. Now I've controlled for points per shot because in 1979, the NBA added this weird shape to the playing surface. And what does that do? It changes the economy of the sport. It changes the economic geography of the sport. And this is a massive jump shooting stipend. If you're standing behind it, you get 50% more points than if you're standing in front of it. What does that do? It opens up the game, number one. But it deforms the economy of the sport. It deformed it. Or it reformed it, however you want to say it. It's a massive change. And some of my earliest, most influential work was just showing the effect of this change to an audience. And as you can see, an average shot from here is worth 0.75 points. That's not a great investment. An average NBA possession is worth 1.1 points. An average corner three is worth 1.1 or 1.2. An average top of the arc three is worth 1. And in fact, the only place you can get more than 1 point a shot is either behind the arc or inside the restricted area. Okay? It's a revelation that has changed the look and feel of the sport I love. And it's a revelation that I helped some people really understand with graphics. Again, this data set came out in 1996. This revelation could have been teased out in 1997, 1998, 1999. But there aren't a lot of geographers working at the NBA league office. There's not a lot of cartographers working in sports analytics. Even in 2003, Michael Lewis puts Moneyball out. That doesn't happen. Nobody's thinking about mapping the data. And then another thing we can do with this same data set from 1996 is look at the unique spatial signatures of every player in the league and show you what makes Stephen Curry different from Klay Thompson, right? What makes Russell Westbrook different than Steph Curry? What makes Russell Westbrook different than Stephen Curry? Steph Curry's, they're both nice. I mean, Russell's one of my favorite players to watch play basketball. But generally speaking, Stephen is a much more efficient jump shooter, and we can show that. Everybody knows that, but the power is showing that, not just telling that. And some of these charts we made in the 2010s were pretty innovative because they showed people where somebody was active as a shooter and how efficient they were in those places, right? Again, these metrics themselves aren't new, but the spatial referencing of these metrics was new, like treating them with the spatial considerations they deserve was a big part of basketball analytics in the 2010s. So that same day, I present my paper at Sloan, and my wife is Adrienne Sear. She teaches at Penn State. She'll attest to this. My life changed that day. March 2012. We're pregnant with our first kid, but I'm down at MIT and meeting people like this. There's a picture from that day. Never met that guy before. Know him now, but Fast Company's writing articles about that paper and that encounter. Slate, with probably the headline that makes Cindy happy is, this is geography. The color scheme probably doesn't make Cindy happy, but trying to make you proud, Cindy. That day at MIT, I made my ESPN debut. And again, I did not go to the conference that day thinking I would be on ESPN. And then 3 months later, my life is changing. I'm on the front page of the New York Times doing the NBA Finals preview of 2012. I had never written a word about basketball until March of 2012. That's my first public basketball article in June of 2012. It was in the 2012 finals. One of them's easy. Miami. No. Thunder. All right, so this is LeBron's first championship. So that was a really cool feature. And I remember doing that in the summer of 2012, interrupting a backpacking trip in California to build these charts in a coffee shop in Santa Cruz with a bunch of vegan stoners or whatever. Yeah, they make good coffee. Yeah. But yeah, this is sort of that era for me. This is the definitive graphic of that push to show the economic geography of pro basketball. Again, sitting here in 2025, this is self-evident. Everybody who watches basketball knows this, right? That mid-range is stupid. People didn't know this in 2012. So another way to look at this is mapping out. So we add the three-point line. The same year Larry Magic entered the NBA, 1979. And only 3 to 4% of the shots are threes that first year at the left side of this graphic, right? And what we've seen is a steady increase in that number. We crossed 5% in the 80s. We crossed, 10% in the 90s. And it goes out. And actually, for those of you who remember watching Michael Jordan play, he played with a shortened three-point line for 3 seasons in the 90s because they were worried scoring was so low and offense was so inefficient. They moved the line in, and you can see how that creates a surge in three-point activity there in 1994. They must have thought something in 1997 where this is getting a little much. 21% of our shots are threes. Let's bring the line back to where it was. So they snap it right back to where it was in 1997. That's the only downtick in this graph. You see that big downtick, it's because we moved the line out. Michael's career, and then we get to sort of a plateau, and this is the Moneyball era, right? 2003 to 2010, 2011, 2012, when I present that paper. Three-point rate is kind of steady at that time, right? And then, you know, I'm a small part of this, but analytics, the awareness of efficiency. And this graph ends in 2019. You can keep drawing that line up over in the 2020s, and now over 40% of the NBA's field goal attempts are three-point attempts. So in the history of the line, it's gone from 3% to 40%. Similar stories in college basketball. But the NBA is ahead of the WNBA and college basketball for three-point rate. Some teams are exceptions to that. You can't quit doing something without starting doing something else. The mid-range is the other story here. People talk about the rise of the three, but the shots that I grew up practicing at Green Hollow Park, those fadeaway mid-rangers off the left block, those are gone. Players don't take those Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki shots anymore. They're gone. So it's not just a story about falling in love with threes. It's a zero-sum game. The death of the mid-range is a big part of this story. Analytically, it's easy to justify. Aesthetically, it kind of sucks. And it's kind of sad that the lineage of the game has been disrupted so much. So I'm torn. There's a tension I write about a lot when I think about where should the line be and why. So in 2013, I'm at ESPN, and I leave academics, and I just start writing full-time about the NBA. The first athlete I interviewed in my life was LeBron in 2013. They were in the midst of, if you remember this, they won 30-some games in a row. And I went down to Miami in the middle of that winning streak to interview him. Probably looking back, this is absolute apex LeBron James, 2012-13, the best he's ever been and ever will be at the game. But his game had changed. And I pitched to him and his agent that I wanted to tell the story about how his game had evolved in his 10 years in the NBA in a new way. And they agreed, and so there I was. And this is the first graphic I showed to him, and I had all these printed out charts, and I'm sitting with him in the locker room, and I hand him this. He's like, "These are my shots?" He says, "That's some unique shit, man." I love to say that story, but the message there is the best player in the world had never seen his own shooting data plotted out, ever. Best data in the world, best shooter in the world, most expensive basketball player in the world. Never seen it in 2013. Never seen it. One of my framed possessions that I have in my office at UT is I asked him to sign one and circle his favorite shots, and it's on my wall at my office from that same day. But the idea was to get him to think spatially and talk about how he evolved as a young player in Cleveland, who was essentially the Cleveland Cavaliers point guard, to the Heatles era where he has Dwayne Wade, Mario Chalmers, and just to have him talk about the geography of his own game and the 10 years that he'd been in the NBA. Another thing that happens around that time, and this is really a story of data sets, guys. So the 1996 data set we talked about, scorers hand charting shot locations, that still happens in college basketball. It still happens in high school basketball. That data is out there. But in 2012, 2011, the NBA started installing what are called Sport View cameras, player tracking system that captures the location of all 10 players 30 times a second, 25 times a second, and the basketball itself. This is a new era in basketball analytics. We now have the center of mass of every NBA player 25 times a second for every game. So we go from box score data with some raw shooting coordinates to I know where all 10 dudes are at all times, 25 times a second. So with new data comes new opportunities. That's one of my theses here today. In 2012, this changed sports analytics. This changed basketball analytics. And because of my paper at MIT, the company was like, do you want to play with this data? And I said, yes. And in 2013, I started a group at Harvard called XY Hoops with some statisticians from their stats department. And we started cracking on this. And I wrote this piece about what we called expected possession value for anybody who loves soccer in here, expected goals, same concept for basketball. The idea is you can sort of estimate the likelihood that the team with the ball is going to score at any given moment. And the small adjustments in that number as a possession unfolds are the cool sort of microeconomics of the game, right? So if LeBron James has the ball by himself underneath the basket, nobody's around him, we can estimate that possession value is worth almost exactly 2 points, right? But if I have the ball with 1 second on the shot clock and LeBron James is guarding me 30 feet from the hoop, the expected possession value at that moment is 0. So finding out how we're getting between 0 and 2 and who's doing that and how we're doing that is still, guys, I think the future of basketball analytics. Understanding that. And soccer's working on it pretty well. Football has its own expected points added metrics. But this was the first thing we tried to do, really advanced statistical modeling, like way beyond the thematic cartography I brought to the equation. I'm out collaborating with statisticians with a capital S at Harvard, and they're building out these models with machine learning. And that was really powerful stuff. And again, we're still working on this, but you can look at decisions this way. So this is Kawhi Leonard, who's been in the news recently, my old friend. But you can look at any predicament in a basketball game and look at the options a player has. I could pass it over there to Matt Bonner. I could pass to Tony Parker. I could dribble it. I could shoot it. I could pass to Tim Duncan. Always a good idea. I could pass to Danny Green. But starting to look at what would happen to that expected possession value with each of those choices is a new kind of basketball analytics framework. And again, I think it's still one of the great problems we have in basketball. Again, though, it only was made possible with that weird camera setup that the NBA put in. You couldn't do this with Penn State basketball right now because they don't have that data for Penn State basketball. But with new data comes new opportunities. In 2015, you get a call, hey, do you want to help us think about building the 2016 Olympic team? And I said, no. I said, yes, I'll do that. And that was like another thrilling moment for me to work with Coach K and put pickup games together with names like that on a whiteboard is pretty great. Honestly, one of the pinch me moments of my life. And one of these names is why I can say helped the team win a gold medal. And it's that Kevin name right there. Who's that? Kevin Durant. Ever heard of him? But seriously, Kevin went to the University of Texas. No big deal. But he's also the greatest Olympics men's basketball player of all time. There's some women who have 5 gold medals. Can anybody name those women? Sue and Diana. I think that's right. Does Kevin have 4 or 5? He has 2012, 16, 20, 24. So if he rolls his old ass out of bed in LA and we win, he could match those gals. But yeah, he's the all-time leading scorer in Olympic basketball. And without him, we don't win in Rio. It wasn't the analytics that won those. Don't get me wrong. It was him. I started to delve into the team side around then and became a member of the Spurs front office in 2015 as well, where I built out an analytics group that's still in place. I still love them. I built that out, loved working for the team. As Adrian knows, I didn't love it driving from Austin, Texas to San Antonio, Texas a lot and going to games in suits and being up all night. That wasn't that fun, but it was a great experience. I still love the Spurs. But in 2018, I left to come back to ESPN at the University of Texas and write the book that Brian was talking about earlier. Sprawlball came out in April 2019. this is my first line of my first book. And it's I put it to make Cindy happy, right? So, did I finally get your approval? This book became a New York Times bestseller, no big deal. But thank you to geography and mapping. But this was why did I leave the Spurs and do this? I wanted to capture this moment. The NBA turned inside out in 2010 and nobody had written a book about it. I knew it wasn't going to be Moneyball, but it was a crazy moment. The sport I loved had turned inside out, and I thought I had an opportunity to document that at the end of the decade. And so that's what that book is about. Again, you can see these graphics in there that you've already seen. By the end of the decade, we'd gone from, Michael Jordan and that post play and Dirk Nowitzki, the best unassisted scorers of the previous era, and their craft had been updated. This dude has a new firmware update. What are these guys doing differently? They're not in the post. They're not playing with their back to the basket. They're facing guys up. They're dribbling through their legs, and they're shooting from behind that magical line. This guy came along, same kind of thing. So the game changed dramatically, not just with three-point rate, but what it looked like when you went to an NBA game completely shifted. And I wanted to help document that. And again, maps had a huge way of documenting how the game had changed and why it changed. And we had a unique ability to do that. So this is probably one of the most viral graphics I've made. Classic 200 shot locations goes from that to this. The mid-range is gone. The most common shot locations in the NBA. Right? And I was a witness to that. I was a part of that. It was when I was in the NBA, it was happening. And, that's the power of a very clean map to show the audience. It's like show, not tell. I could sit here and say mid-range is dead, or I could just show you that. And so I think this is still a very effective tool in sports journalism and communication. So let's get up to date. In 2019, when I left the Spurs, I had a chance to go start an institute at the University of Texas at Austin called the Business of Sports Institute, where we have undergrads and grad students who really are passionate about having careers in sports. And within our business school environment, we have big events where we bring in speakers, we have classes, we have a minor that's exploding in popularity. And so I sort of returned to academia after that weird foray in basketball, but as a sports analyst. And I'm really proud of what we're building at the University of Texas. And if you're interested, apply to our grad programs. And where I want to end today is with the new data set that is changing pro basketball. So as I said, that XY data from 1996 helped me make shot charts in 2012 and map the NBA in new ways. The sport view data that I did that fancy modeling with, that's really 2012. That's center of mass data. I just know where the dudes are. Their body's just the center of their body. In 2023 Hawkeye data, who knows what Hawkeye data is? You probably know it from other sports. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, you guys know. What is it? Yeah, what differentiates it, do you think, from the previous motion tracking? Who's a soccer fan in here? You guys see Hawkeye? Where do you guys see Hawkeye? No. Where do you see it in almost every game, though? Offsides. And so those little blue and white glyphs, the cartography of offsides, that's Hawkeye data. The difference is we're tracking arms and legs of our athletes now. So not only do I know where LeBron the dot is, I know where LeBron's legs, arms, elbows, and hips are 60 times a second. And so that one of the early applications of that in soccer is offsides. I know if that player was illegally the closest offensive player to the goal or whatever the rule is, down to the fingertip. So soccer had found a really good use for this in officiating, and the NBA adopted it in 2023, not that long ago. So this is sort of the third data set that has infiltrated the NBA and brought a staggering amount of spatial data into the equation. And so when you look at this, this is what it looks like, right? You just get what we call headless skeletons, and you see basketball as vectors. In geography, we call this vector data, right? And my colleague and I at the University of Texas, Van Bouchon, have been working with this to try to figure out how we can turn it into cool stuff. And so in 2025, another pinch me moment is I called the Western Conference Finals on this sort of nerdy insight cast with Ryan Ruocco and Tim Legler. And we used a lot of data and a lot of the graphics that I'm going to show that you guys saw at the top. But like, there's so many applications. Now that we know where arms and legs are, we're helping basketball players really map out their own shooting mechanics. Right? So I can tell a player how they shoot a free throw. We can measure that in new ways. We can look at the biomechanics of free throw shooting or three-point shooting in profound new ways in games. There's a lot of opportunities here that we didn't have in 2022 that it's taking a long time to figure out how to do it. Again, it's spatial data. I have LeBron's elbow 60 times a second. I have his wrist 60 times a second, his shoulder 60 times a second. What can I do with that? So for the kinesiology kids here, like, that's a great opportunity, but you need to understand how to use spatial data and calculate and derive things from spatial data sets. So yeah, I'll end where I started. Like, the
It's brought to you by KFC. Not just buckets, clutch buckets. This started way back in October. Throughout the course of the regular season and here in the playoffs, Tyrese Halliburton on an historic run. Look at the field goal percentage in the final 2 minutes, either tie or take the lead. You know, all talked about was that anonymous poll in the Athletic. He was voted the most overrated. I think.
So, and these are the other ones. I can maybe let this whole showcase run. But we saw an opportunity to elevate shot charts. Not only just where was this dude when he shot it, how did he get there? What does it look like? The biography of the shot isn't about an XY coordinate. It's about an athlete being an athlete. And so we worked really hard since 2023 to build this tool because we knew there was like really cool stories about how athletes score the basketball. And that's the contemporary cartography of pro basketball. And that's what I'm working really hard on now. And we're working with ESPN again this season. I'm trying to finalize that deal so that these kinds of graphics are in all of their broadcasts this year. And in the NBA Finals, again, we keep making them better and better and better. And that's sort of the cartography of hoops. So, I mean, my conclusion is like where there's new data sets, a lot of times there's new spatial data, but there's opportunity. If you know how to play with spatial data, you're in a pretty good position. As sports data increases more and more and more in every sport, spatial coordinates are a huge part of that explosion. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions if you have them. Thank you, guys.
We do have time for questions. We're gonna do kind of we've got a really young crowd here. I'm gonna do the Phil Donahue reference. You're not gonna get it, but Eric and I are basically, like, if you have a question, I'm gonna ask you to put it in the microphone because I think we have also a huge audience watching this remotely, and so that way they can hear the question. And so I saw a hand there, and then I'll come to Jen.
Yeah.
First. So I know in basketball specifically, there's kind of a lot of privatization in like actually getting data.
Yeah.
So I was kind of just wondering how you suggest someone trying to get into sports analytics, how you go about getting that data for personal projects and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's something that's a pain in the ass, I'll be honest with you, and it's really unfortunate. I grew up in a time like, especially with geography and spatial data, the US government was pretty good about giving people access to a lot of free data to learn from. But yeah, the best data sets in sports right now are behind lock and key. One of the things I've been able to do at University of Texas as a professor is to work with the NBA and to work with the San Antonio Spurs still to get my students some access to that. But you raise a great question, and unfortunately, there's not a great answer in a lot of places. So you have to be really, it's almost the hardest part of these projects is to get access to the data, which is, again, that's just the country we live in right now. But yeah, the best data sets in the world are not like on a Dropbox somewhere for you to go play with, which is unfortunate for young people. But I think if you're lucky, some of your professors and institutions can get you access to some of that data set. It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer.
Hi, that was a really exciting presentation for me. I'm going to ask my question as I like to call myself a reformed economist, now geographer. But I see these data analytics and I'm thinking of, well, how would I use that like from a competition perspective?
Right.
And since now the mid-range is like hollowed out or
Yeah.
dead in your world, that's where I would go as an economist. So I'm wondering how your data might be used to think of the players that might be used or that we might develop going forward so that we can exercise some comparative advantage where, defense isn't thinking right now.
Yeah.
So
No, it's a
curious on
great
that.
question. And the few players that can score in that zone efficiently, again, anybody want to name names? DeRozan-ish. We already talked about him once. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but even better than Shai is Kevin. Kevin Durant is hyper valuable in part because he can go to this unused territory and make it valuable real estate. And the numbers are so stacked against these jump shooters inside the three-point arc that it's virtually impossible. Kevin, Chris Paul, Dirk, like these are guys that broke the math. Even the rank and file NBA players, there's just, the math is so drastic, like a 50% stipend for the shot. And again, average player shoots 38% from 16 feet and 35% from 25 feet. What are we doing? Like that's the ordinary math. Occasionally there's a Kevin Durant who comes through, or Chris Paul, and says, or Steve Nash, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that breaks it. But that's why those dudes are superstars in part, if you want to think about it that way, is because they have the whole chessboard to play with. From a developmental point of view, I still think like the best players in the world should try to get to that point. But the rank and file, depressing thing is like, why would I even practice that shot? And somebody who grew up watching Michael or Dirk, like that's, or Kobe, that's depressing.
Go ahead, Chris.
We've got a question from Zoom from Donna Bari. Does the ability to see arms, legs, etc. also mean an ability to analyze when/how players get injured?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like the biomechanics, if I was advising young people who want to be in sports right now, kinesiology is a great start, but get technical with biomechanics. Again, we've been stealing from baseball in the NBA for a long time, but every baseball team now has a biomechanics lab, several biomechanists on staff looking at how athletes move their bodies, how those movements interact with their ability to throw the ball hard, tear their rotator cuff, get Tommy John surgery. How can they get a player up to that edge without breaking them? So there's not only this fascinating emerging area between understanding the mechanics of skills like shooting, but from an injury prevention standpoint, we can detect fatigue in powerful new ways in this data set and start to understand, man, what if we had a flag that would have stopped Tyrese Halliburton from going out there, or Kevin Durant going out there with a strained calf and then tearing their Achilles tendon? Those are really profound opportunities right now. That's not my expertise, but that's a very good question because I think it's a big area of growth where biomechanists start working with statisticians and understanding how human health interacts with these data sets.
Okay, I come from an operations research background. So what you've done with your research is actually created a Nash equilibrium where everybody's gravitating to the same points because they know that that's where the scores are at. Have you looked at potentially generating synthetic data to help like war game places where they can break out of the equilibrium?
No, but that's a great idea. I have a pretty pessimistic view of the equilibrium because of the geography of it. Like there's 6 shots in the modern game, maybe 5 really, depending on how you look at it. I think the game has changed a lot aesthetically in part because people are trying to get to those 5 shots exclusively. And I just don't know. I wish there were 9 shots. That would be, but there really isn't because the guys are so fast and there's some convergence on it. I'm not an operations research expert by any means, so I'd like to learn more about that, but I don't know. No is my answer to your question. I haven't done it, but it could be. I'd love for a new regime of basketball to sort of come out. I think that's what that question was sort of about too. I can hear you.
Questions of a lot of people here are consumers of the work as opposed to actual practitioners.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I wanted to ask a question how it works downstream when who measures objective. But sometimes it needs to be combined with the subjective. And many scholars just don't measure things that are subjective. Example I can think of is if you talk to high school and college coaches, some kids can make certain shots. They're good at making good shots. The coach knows what a good shot, but it's sort of subjective. So you can't really map shooting percentage and good shot because a good shot is subjective to the coach. But the coach knows what's a good shot.
Does he or she? Yeah, they think they do.
Effective things you can't measure really just shouldn't be studied. Or is there a way that you can combine analytics with effectively subjective variables, get something out of it more than you get from the objective?
I think you can, like, if shot quality is your example of subjectivity, like I can quantify shot quality right now. I could look at every women's basketball shot from Penn State last year and grade it and be pretty confident about that. But some of the stuff, why I love basketball, like this was my career to get into basketball, was like nerd it up and quantify everything and model everything. But I love it because it's not that, right? It's more like jazz music or whatever at its best. Like I don't want to map jazz music, like, or stand-up comedy or whatever. Basketball is beautiful. And I don't want all that stuff to go away. But I'm not quite sure shot quality is the right example to push on it. I do think, like, to our earlier conversation, there's a huge opportunity for analysts and stewards of the game to work together to create the most beautiful version of the product. And I think one of the most powerful demonstrations of sports analytics this century was Theo Epstein working with baseball to fix baseball with pitch clocks and shifts and sort of trying to engineer the product they wanted. And that's what we were talking about earlier, as opposed to just solve the product that we have based on this layout. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Finally got my beloved Red Sox a World Series ring. So
oh, yes, yeah.
In the back.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. It's really pleasure to hear you talk. I have 2 questions. They're not related to each other, but the first is, in my world, I think a lot about something called research to practice. And I remember reading an article a long time ago about Shane Battier being a real consumer of data. And
you know who wrote that article?
You did?
No.
Oh, I don't remember. And I was wondering.
Michael Lewis wrote that
okay.
article, but yeah.
And so, you know, if Kobe was going left from 18 feet, force him right or whatever it was. And I would imagine from your perspective, I'm just wondering how differential the players in the NBA are in consuming this and actually listening to it and putting it into practice. That's part 1. And then 2 is more speculative, is just like these historical players from my youth who would carry over into this modern game? So like, could Olajuwon dominate just as well in this space as previously?
Yeah, so I think there was a reticence. There was sort of that tension between nerds and scouts and coaches and athletes is really captured in Moneyball, in Trouble with the Curve, and a lot of this cliche sports analytics. But athletes are especially different. I mean, now, like a young NBA player in 2025, like Tyrese Halliburton's a great example of a dude who wants to see the data, but he's also just like a 25-year-old dude who grew up in America in the 21st century. He's played 2K his whole life. He's thought about data his whole life. He's seen my stuff. He's seen he breathes data. When I was doing this with the old guys in 2010, they didn't think like that. And the coaches certainly were the last to adapt. Greg Popovich was open-minded to it, but Mike Krzyzewski, coaches I've worked with, they don't think about the game and data, and they've been pretty successful. And so that means they're pretty reticent to adapt a whole new way of thinking, but athletes had some of that too. But I think that's changing. I mean, generally the arc of statistics in sports are on the same trajectory. They're intertwined. Everything's more quantitative. Everything is more data oriented. And kids in this classroom, as you've seen, I'm sure, are more quantitative than the kids 10 years ago. And they were more quantitative than kids 10 years before them. And I think that informs a lot of this. So the athletes now are pretty into it. You can't go to a Penn State basketball practice without seeing data. At the UT women's basketball gym, we track every shot in the gym with the system called NOAA. So they see stats on every free throw they take. So it's just now they're native speakers in a way that even when I got in 2010, 2015, they weren't. To your other question, I always think great athletes would thrive. Like Hakeem is probably one of the greatest athletes to ever play in the NBA. He would thrive. Michael Jordan would be shooting threes. Like people who say like, oh, Michael couldn't do this. Like they don't know. Michael was an insane person who would do whatever it took to beat you. Like that's why he was Michael. Oh, Kobe couldn't shoot threes. Well, if he was Steph's age, he would shoot threes. So I think it's just a changing thing. And the thing between the ears is what separates those dudes, is they are just killers, whether it's Hakeem or Michael or Kobe. So I think that's what makes those athletes special, and they would have thrived in any era. There's some exceptions to that, but not the superstars, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I think I want to go in a direction of, I see a lot of the data that you've shown us.
Yeah.
It's a lot offensive, like looking at how we can maximize offensive players. How much development do you see or see a potential for in terms of looking at defensive, whether defensive schemes or defensive responses to this modern game, which I know a lot of people talk about how defense is dead in the modern game with teams maximizing their points and scoring 150, 140.
Yeah.
But how do you look at potentially, okay, now that we have all this analytics on, we know these are where the most maximized and most effective shots are. How can we develop the perfect defense to mitigate that, I guess?
Yeah, well, in the NBA, the best defense just won the championship. So defense isn't dead. And that defense is a modern defense, and they know they can't defend every shot. So what do? They lead the league in deflections, steals, they force more turnovers, they end possessions before they get to shots better than anybody else. And so I would look to that. The Thunder are the sort of the new Spurs, as much as it hurts me to say, but they're the smartest team, they're the smartest defense, and ultimately their defense is better than their offense. And so I would just say defense looks different now too. But it's never going to go away. If you can't get stops, you're not going to win basketball games. That's never going to change. And OKC is just doing it with being thieves, deflecting passes. So it's not always about, allowing certain types of shots. They're trying to stop them from even shooting, which is the best way to sort of tank their shot portfolio, is to just reduce the number of investments they have.
So we've got the time for maybe just 2 or 3 more questions. And so I've got 2 folks over here, but Chris has one from someone watching online.
From Yal Yehuda, what about the player's career progression and shot choice? Michael would make use of his post-up option in later stage of his career much more often than using explosive power, going strong to the rim. LeBron as well, if I'm not mistaken. Do those data sets take age decisions, prolonging careers, or human behavior into account?
I mean, the data sets don't, but any model that you should sort of, if you're trying to advise an athlete how to play and you are sort of Al Horford's agent, let's say, and you're looking at 2013, 2014, and Al's getting older, and Brooke Lopez, another example, is like, hey, what if we started shooting threes and we got another $75 million deal next summer? How about that? And then all of a sudden you start to see that exact effect. So I think some of the guys at the end of their career right now, like Al Horford and LeBron James, to me, capture that effect. But it's also combined because the game changed in the 20 years they've been in the league. Like LeBron didn't shoot threes well for most of his career, but he's definitely extended his career by doing it. And I would say some of that's him just getting older and being safer on his body, but that's the game has changed. And if you're going to shoot a jump shot in the NBA, it's going to be a three-point jump shot for the most part. I think that was a bad answer to that question, but it's an online person, so I don't really care.
Hi, I have two questions. The first is a follow-up to a previous question about defense. How do you graph or spatially portray like advanced switches or like help defense, things like that? And my second question is, I'm an engineer and I like watching basketball, but I can't really play that well. How can I implement thought processes like EPV and spatial awareness in my day-to-day life?
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, I think sports strategy, like Moneyball is great because Moneyball is really a story about how financial thinking infiltrated pro sports, right? And bringing business school ideology into front offices. That's what it's about. Ironically, sports is so visible and so people are so passionate, then they start to reverse engineer EPV and this into their own lives, right? But it's actually just business school and economics thinking, right? That's it. Like all of these choice things that however you're going to spend your Friday, like microeconomics, those people have thought about this for a long time. So study that. What was the first part of your question?
How do you spatially graph defense?
It's harder. I mean, we did a paper on defense when I was at Harvard. It was pretty good, but it's really hard because defense is really a team endeavor, and you can't really try to say what somebody's trying to do when they're playing defense. Were they supposed to stay there? Were they playing zone defense when they got blown by? Were they playing man-to-man? What was the scheme? Right? Were they supposed to switch that pick and roll or not? And if you don't know those prior huge pieces of information about the tactics, it's really hard to sort of layer on a performance analysis of behavior, right? Because the coach says, hey, I want you to do A, B, and C. And then if your model says, well, B and C are dumb, then who should get punished, the defender or the coach? And so it's very hard. That's why defensive analytics in basketball are very far behind offensive. Shooting's the easiest stuff. There's the lowest hanging fruit. That's why I gobbled all the easy stuff up early. But it's hard, man. If you can do it, let me know.
Okay, we have time for one last question, please.
Hi. My question is, do you think that mid-range shots being dead are independently for the NBA? Like, I don't know the stats behind it, but I feel like for the WNBA, what I see is that it seems to be very efficient for the WNBA. And if it is, like, why do you think that there's that big difference?
That's a great question. I work very closely with the University of Texas women's basketball program, and I yell at them every day that they take too many mid-range shots. It's the same thing. Generally, it's the same math. Okay, not one-to-one, but generally. And the WNBA has a revolution coming too. They're a little bit behind on this shot selection thing, but there's a secret effect that really happened in the NBA that drove this beyond just the math. Is the NBA, the selection bias of the human beings in the NBA has changed so much in the last 10 years. You can't get into the NBA if you can't shoot threes now. That wasn't true 20 years ago. So the population that's driving these crazy shooting stats in the NBA is a population that's changed. The personnel has changed. And I don't think the WNBA has had that. There's a gal named Gianna Nepkins who plays at Utah, just transferred to UCLA. She's an incredible shooter. And I was just talking to the LA Sparks the other day about, where she should go in the draft. She's an incredible shooter, like 45%, like Steph stuff. And, oh, top 10. I'm like, no, she should go 2 or 1, but they're still taking big players. The personnel values in the NBA have changed. And the personnel values on the women's side are changing. Caitlin's going to change it. Sabrina's going to change it. But it hasn't quite clicked over yet. So it's not only like the analytics awakening with dudes like me yelling at coaches. It's who's on our team in the first place. Who's on the floor in the first place. And the biggest driver of those NBA numbers is the fact that all 5 dudes shoot threes. And that the coaches have tactics that are designed to get those shots from the jump. So when we watch the WNBA playoffs, we're going to see Asia Wilson posting up in ways we haven't seen on the men's game in a long time. Right? Even Nikola Jokic is out on the top of the arc running the offense from up there, which would have been crazy for a center to do just 15 years ago. So it's all of these factors combining at once. But I'm eager to watch the women's game evolve. I'm confident it will.
Great. Well, I'm mindful of time and we have a lot of folks here and folks going to be running the classes and everything. If you have an available hour, we are going to be doing a reception in Walker Building where geography department's located on 319. There will be food. And I've been told that it's okay to say you're all cordially invited. The last little tidbit for you, any guesses on who the wealthiest undergraduate geography major is? Any guesses?
It ain't me, bro. Don't point at me.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
From UNC.
Geography major.
Never know what's going to happen as you pursue geography. And please join me in thanking Kirk for a fantastic talk.
Thank you. Before you go, it's called coffee hour, but they don't even give me coffee. I could have used it. I want to say thank you to Brian, Cindy. You know how I feel about you, the whole Department of Geography. I wouldn't be here without you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the game. And again, I need tickets. If anybody has 2 extra tickets, thank you guys. We'll see you soon. Huh? Buddy. You have 2 or you? Yeah, I'm still on. Thank you for coming.